Thumbelina. There was once a woman who wished very much for a little tiny child. But she did not know where she could get one, and so she went to an old witch. "I would so love to have a little child," she said to the witch. "Will you please tell me where I can get one?" "Oh yes, that can easily be managed," said the witch. "Here is a barleycorn, but it is not at all the kind that grows in the farmer's field, or is fed to the chickens. Plant it in a flower pot, and see what happens." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the witch 12 bright shillings. Then she went home and planted the barleycorn, and immediately up sprang a great, beautiful flower which looked exactly like a tulip, but the petals were tightly closed, as though the flower was still a bud. "That is a lovely flower," said the woman, and she kissed its beautiful red and yellow cup. Just as she kissed it, the flower opened with a loud pop. It was a real tulip, as one could see, but in the middle of the flower upon the green stamens sat a tiny little maiden, wonderfully delicate and beautiful. She was not over half a thumb's length in height, and so she was called Thumbelina. She was given a beautifully polished walnut shell for a cradle, with blue-violet leaves for mattresses, and a rose leaf for a coverlet. There she slept at night, but in the daytime she played about on the table, where the woman had set a plate with a wreath of flowers all around it, their stalks standing in water. On the water in this plate floated a great tulip leaf, and on this the little maiden could sail from one side of the plate to the other. She had 2 white horse hairs with which to row, and a very pretty sight it all made, indeed. She could sing also, and so delicately and sweetly that nothing like it had ever before been heard in this world. One night, as she lay in her pretty bed, an old toad came hopping in through the window, where a pane had been broken out. The toad was very ugly, big, and damp, and it hopped right down on the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under the red rose leaf. "That would be a lovely wife for my son," said the toad, and without more ado she seized the walnut shell, in which Thumbelina slept, and hopped away with it through the broken window pane down into the garden. There flowed a great, broad brook. The ground at the edge of the water was swampy and soft, and here lived the toad and her son. Ua. He was ugly and repulsive. He looked just like his mother. Croak. Croak. Brek kukakeks. That was all he could say when he saw the pretty little maiden in the walnut shell. "Don't talk so loud, or she will wake up," said the old toad. "She could run away from us yet, for she is as light as a bit of swan's down. We must put her out in the brook on one of the broad water lily leaves. It will seem just like an island to her, she is so small and light. Then she cannot run away while we are getting the parlor in order under the soft mud, where you two are to keep house together." Out in the brook grew many water lilies. Their broad green leaves looked as if they were floating on top of the water. The leaf farthest out in the brook was the largest. So the old toad swam out, and on it laid the walnut shell with Thumbelina still asleep. Early in the morning the poor little maid awoke, and when she saw where she was she began to cry bitterly, for there was water on all sides of the great green leaf, and she could not get to land. The old toad sat in the marsh, decking out her room with marsh grasses and yellow weeds. It was to be made very pretty for the new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out, with her ugly son, to the leaf where Thumbelina stood. They had come to fetch her pretty bed, which was to be placed in the bridal chamber before she herself entered it. The old toad bowed low in the water before her and said, "This is my son, he is to be your husband, and you shall live splendidly together down in the mud." Croak. Croak. Brek kukakeks, was all the son could say. Then they took the dainty little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina all alone on the great leaf. She wept, for she did not want to live with the nasty toad, or have her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes swimming in the water below had seen the toad and heard what she had said. So they put their heads out of the water, for they wanted to get a look at the little girl. When they saw how wonderfully pretty she was, they felt very sorry that she should have to go down to live with the ugly toad. No, that must never be. They crowded round the green stalk, which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and gnawed it off with their teeth. Away floated the leaf, far down the stream, with Thumbelina, far away, where the toad could not get her. Thumbelina sailed on and on. The little birds that sat in the bushes saw her, and sang, "What a lovely little maiden." Farther and farther floated the leaf, and thus out of the country travelled Thumbelina. A beautiful little white butterfly kept fluttering round her, and at last alighted on the leaf, for it liked Thumbelina very much. She, too, was pleased and happy, for now the toad could not get her, and everything was so beautiful about her as she floated along. The sun shone upon the water, which glistened like the brightest gold. Then she took her girdle and bound one end of it round the butterfly, fastening the other end of the ribbon to the leaf. The leaf now glided onward much faster, and Thumbelina, too, for she was standing on the leaf, you know. Just then a big beetle came flying along. He saw her and immediately clasped his claw round her slender waist, and flew with her up into a tree. The green leaf went floating away down the brook, and the butterfly with it, for you know he was fastened to the leaf, and could not get loose. My! How frightened poor little Thumbelina was when the beetle carried her off into the tree. But she was most sorry for the beautiful white butterfly that she had bound to the leaf. If he could not free himself, he would have to starve to death. The beetle, however, did not trouble himself at all about that. He seated himself with her on the biggest green leaf of the tree, gave her the honey of flowers to eat, and declared that she was very pretty, though she did not in the least resemble a beetle. Later, all the other beetles who lived in the tree came to pay a visit. They looked at Thumbelina, and all the young lady beetles shrugged their shoulders. "Why," they said, "she has only 2 legs. What a wretched appearance. She has no feelers," they cried. "Her waist is quite slender, fie. She looks just like a human being. How ugly she is," said all the lady beetles. And yet Thumbelina was so very, very pretty. That, too, was the opinion of the beetle who had found and seized her. But when all the others declared she was ugly, he, too, believed it at last, and would not have her at all. She might go where she pleased. They flew down from the tree with her, and set her upon a daisy, and she wept because she was so ugly that the beetles would not have her. And yet she was the loveliest little being one could imagine, and as fine and delicate as a rose leaf. All the summer through poor Thumbelina lived quite alone in the great wood. She wove herself a bed out of blades of grass, and hung it under a large burdock leaf, which protected her from the rain. She gathered the honey from the flowers for food, and drank of the dew which every morning lay on the leaves. Thus summer and autumn passed. But now came winter, the cold, long winter. All the birds that had sung for her so sweetly flew away. Trees and flowers lost their leaves. The great leaf under which she had lived shriveled up, and nothing remained of it but a withered stalk. She was dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she herself was so frail and delicate. Poor little Thumbelina! She would surely freeze to death. Now it began to snow, and every snowflake that fell upon her was like a whole shovelful thrown upon one of us, for we are tall, and she was only an inch long. Then she wrapped herself in a withered leaf, but it would not warm her, and she shivered with the cold. Close to the wood where the beetle had left her lay a great cornfield, but the corn had long since been cut, and only the naked dry stubble stood up out of the frozen ground. To her it seemed just like wandering through a great forest, and oh, how she trembled with cold. Then she came to the door of the field mouse, a little hole under the stubble. There, warm and comfortable, the field mouse lived, with a whole roomful of corn, a glorious kitchen, and a pantry. Poor Thumbelina stood at the door just like a poor beggar girl, and asked for a tiny piece of barleycorn, for she had not had the smallest morsel to eat for 2 whole days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, for after all she was a good old field mouse. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was much pleased with Thumbelina. "If you like," she said, "you may stay with me through the winter, but you must keep my room clean and neat, and tell me stories, for of them I am very fond." So Thumbelina did as the kind old field mouse bade her, and lived very comfortably and well. "I am expecting a visit very soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor is in the habit of coming to see me once a week. He is even better off than I am, has great rooms, and wears a beautiful black velvety fur coat. If you could only get him for a husband you would be well off. But he cannot see. You must tell him the prettiest stories you know." Thumbelina, however, did not care about this. She thought nothing of the neighbor, for he was a mole. He came and paid his visits in his black velvet coat. The field mouse told how rich and how learned he was, and how his house was more than 20 times larger than hers. He possessed great learning, but did not like the sun and beautiful flowers, for he had never seen them. Thumbelina had to sing, and she sang both "Ladybird, Ladybird, fly away home," and "When the parson goes afield." The mole fell in love with her, because of her beautiful voice, but he said nothing, so sedate was he. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage in the ground from his own house to theirs, and Thumbelina and the field mouse received permission to walk here whenever they pleased. But he begged them not to be afraid of the dead bird that lay in the passage. It was a real bird with wings and beak. It certainly must have died only a short time before, and was now buried just where the mole had made his tunnel. The mole took a bit of decayed wood in his mouth, for, you see, it glimmers like fire in the dark, and walked ahead, lighting them through the long, dark passage. When they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole thrust his nose against the ceiling and made a great hole through which the daylight could shine. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, his beautiful wings pressed close against his sides, and his head and feet drawn in under his feathers. The poor bird had certainly died of cold. Thumbelina was so very sorry for him. She was very fond of all the little birds. They had sung and twittered so prettily for her all through the summer. But the mole gave it a push with his short legs, and said, "Now he doesn't squeak any more. It must be miserable to be born a little bird. I am thankful that can happen to none of my children. Such a bird has nothing but his tweet-tweet, and has to starve in the winter." "Yes, as a clever man you may well say that," observed the field mouse. "Of what use is all this tweet-tweet to a bird when the winter comes? He must starve and freeze. But they say that's very aristocratic." Thumbelina said nothing, but when the two others turned their backs to the bird, she bent down, put aside the feathers which covered its head, and kissed the closed eyes. "Perhaps it was he who sang so prettily to me last summer," she thought. "How much pleasure he gave me, the dear, beautiful bird." The mole now closed up the hole through which the daylight shone, and accompanied the ladies home. But during the night Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet out of hay. This she carried down and spread over the dead bird, and laid soft cotton, which she had found in the field mouse's room, around him, so that he might lie soft and warm in the cold ground. "Farewell, you pretty little bird," said she. "Farewell. And thanks to you for your beautiful song last summer, when all the trees were green and the sun shone warm upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast. As she did so she was frightened, for it seemed as if something was knocking inside there. It was the bird's heart. He was not dead, he was only numb with the cold. Now he had been warmed, and had come to life again. In autumn all the swallows fly away to the warm countries, but if one happens to be belated, it gets so cold that it drops down as if dead, lies where it falls, and is covered by the cold snow. Thumbelina trembled exceedingly. So startled was she, for the bird was large, very large compared with her, who was only an inch in height. But she took courage, laid the cotton closer round the poor swallow, and brought a leaf that she had used as her own coverlet, and laid it over the bird's head. The next night she crept out to him again, and now he was alive, but quite weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment and look at Thumbelina, as she stood before him with a bit of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no lantern. "Thank you, pretty little child," said the sick swallow, "I have been warmed. Soon my strength will return, and I shall be able to fly about again in the warm sunshine." "Oh," she said, "it is so cold outside. It is snowing and freezing. Stay in your warm bed, and I will nurse you." Then she brought water in the petal of a flower, and the swallow drank, and told her how he had torn one of his wings in a thorn bush, and so had not been able to fly so fast as the other swallows, that were flying away, far away, to the warm countries. At last he had fallen to the ground. He could remember nothing more, and did not in the least know how he had come where she had found him. The swallow remained there all winter, and Thumbelina was good to him and loved him very much. Neither the field mouse nor the mole got to know a thing about him, for they did not like the poor swallow. As soon as spring came, and the sun warmed down into the earth, the swallow said goodbye to Thumbelina. She had opened the hole which the mole had made in the ceiling, and the sun shone brightly in upon them. The swallow asked if Thumbelina did not want to go with him. She could sit on his back, and they would fly far away into the greenwood. But Thumbelina knew that the old field mouse would be grieved if she left her thus. "No, I cannot," said Thumbelina. "Farewell then, farewell, you dear, sweet girl," said the bird as he flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina stood looking after him, and the tears came into her eyes, for she was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet tweet, tweet tweet," sang he, and flew away into the green forest. Thumbelina was very sad. She was not permitted to get out into the warm sunshine. The corn which was sown in the field over the house of the field mouse grew high into the air. It was like a great thick forest for the poor little girl who, you know, was only an inch in height. "You must get your wedding outfit made this summer, Thumbelina," said the field mouse. You see, their neighbor, the tiresome mole in the fur coat, had courted her. "You must have woolen and linen clothes both. You must lack nothing when you become the mole's wife." Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the mole hired 4 spiders to spin and weave for her day and night. Every evening he paid her a visit, and was constantly saying that when the summer was over, the sun would not shine nearly so hot, now it burned the earth as hard as a stone. Yes, when the summer was over, then he would wed Thumbelina. But she was not at all happy, for she did not like the tiresome mole in the black fur coat. Every morning when the sun rose, and every evening when it set, she crept out to the door, and when the wind blew the tops of the corn stalks apart, so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how bright and beautiful it was out there, and wished heartily she could see her dear swallow again. But he would never come back, she thought. He was doubtless flying far away in the fair green forest. When autumn came, Thumbelina had her whole wedding outfit ready. "In 4 weeks you are to be married," said the field mouse to her. But Thumbelina wept, and declared she would not have the tiresome mole. "Nonsense," said the field mouse. "Don't be obstinate, or I will bite you with my white teeth. Why, it is a lovely man you are getting. The queen herself has nothing like his black velvet furs, and his kitchen and cellar are full. Be thankful for your good fortune." Now came the day the wedding was to take place. The mole had already come to fetch Thumbelina. She was to live with him, deep under the earth, and never come out into the warm sunshine. He did not like the sunshine, you know. The poor child was very sorrowful. She was now to say goodbye to the glorious sun, which, after all, she had been allowed by the field mouse to look at from the threshold of the door. "Farewell, thou bright sun," she said, stretching out her arms toward it, and walking out a little way from the house of the field mouse. The corn had now been reaped, and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell," she repeated, and flung her arms round a little red flower which bloomed there. "Greet the little swallow from me, if you see him again." Tweet tweet, tweet tweet. A voice suddenly sounded over her head. She looked up, and there was the little swallow just flying by. He was very happy to see Thumbelina. Then she told him how unwilling she was to have the ugly mole for her husband, and that she would have to live deep under the earth, where the sun never shone. And she could not keep from weeping as she told it. "The cold weather is coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away to the warm countries. Will you come with me? You can sit on my back. Just tie yourself fast with your girdle, and then we shall fly away from the ugly mole and his dark room, far away, over the mountains to the warm countries, where the sun shines brighter than it does here, where it is always summer and lovely flowers always bloom. Do fly with me, dear little Thumbelina, you who saved my life when I lay frozen in the dark underground passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina. She seated herself on the bird's back, with her feet on his outspread wings, and tied her girdle fast to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow flew high in the air, over forests and over seas, high up over the great mountains where the snow always lies, and Thumbelina felt cold in the bleak air. But then she crept under the bird's warm feathers, and only stuck out her little head to admire all the wonders below her. Then they arrived in the warm countries. There the sun shone far brighter than in the cold north, the sky seemed twice as high, and in the ditches and on the hedges grew the most beautiful blue and green grapes. In the woods hung lemons and oranges, and the air was fragrant with myrtle and balsams. On the roads the loveliest children ran about, playing with great bright-colored butterflies. But the swallow flew still farther, and it became more and more beautiful. Under some of the most majestic green trees, by the blue sea stood an ancient palace of dazzling white marble. Vines clustered around the lofty pillars. At the very top were many swallows' nests, and in one of these lived the swallow who carried Thumbelina. "Here is my house," said the swallow, "now select for yourself one of the pretty flowers which grow down yonder, and I will set you down on it. There you shall have everything just as you wish." "That is lovely," she cried, and clapped her little hands. A great marble pillar was lying on the ground, broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina, and set her on one of the broad petals. But what was the little maid's surprise? There in the midst of the flower sat a little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of glass. He wore the most beautiful of golden crowns on his head, and the loveliest wings on his shoulders, and he was no bigger than Thumbelina. He was the angel of the flower. In each of the flowers dwelt such a little man or woman, but this one was king over them all. "My! How beautiful he is," whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The little prince was very much frightened at sight of the swallow, for it was quite a giant beside him, who was so small. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was very glad. She was the very prettiest maiden he had ever seen, and so he took his golden crown from his head and placed it on hers, asked her name, and if she would be his wife, then she should be queen of all the flowers. Now this was truly a different kind of man from the son of the toad, and the mole with the black velvet fur. So she said yes to the charming prince. And out of every flower came a lady or gentleman, so dainty that they were a delight to behold. Each one brought Thumbelina a present, and the best gift of all was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a great white fly. These were fastened to Thumbelina's back, and now she also could fly from flower to flower. Then there was great rejoicing, and the little swallow sat up above in his nest and sang for them, as well as he could. Yet in his heart he was sad, for he was so fond of Thumbelina, and would have liked never to part from her. "You should not be called Thumbelina," said the flower angel to her. "That is an ugly name, and you are so beautiful. We will call you Maya." "Goodbye, goodbye," said the little swallow as he set out on his return to the northern lands. There in Denmark, above the window of the room where lives the man who knows how to tell stories, he had a little nest. To this man the swallow sang, "Tweet tweet, tweet tweet," and that is how we got the whole story.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content.